Okay, so today I'm going to talk about a hidden form of power. We have talked about other hidden forms of power, but there is a particular form of power where there is no apparent coercion. So you would not see that somebody is actually exercising coercion, but still they do exercise a lot of power and indirect coercion. So an example of direct coercion would be that I am walking down a particular street and somebody comes in, shows me a gun, and says that either you give me your watch and your wallet and your phone or your life. So the choice for me is pretty simple, that I will give my watch and wallet and phone. In fact, I know that in certain areas around the world, it is recommended that people travel with a little bit of cash, because if somebody actually catches you and you don't have any cash to give out, then they might just go crazy and shoot you or hurt you. So it's better to give out that little bit of cash. But this is an example of overt coercion where somebody is literally pointing a gun at you. There are other more subtler forms of coercion. In many cases, you see that in colonial setups. So, for example, a lot of times a colonial power may say that we did not really coerce you, there was no direct threat or direct coercion involved, but uh, at some level you know and you understand that there is a substantial amount of coercion involved in the whole transaction, in the way things are organized. So in the second part, I am going to now explain to you how this subtle form of coercion is exercised. Now I'm building on this paper by Professor Kaushik Basu called One Kind of Power from 1986. And in this, he talks about triadic power. Essentially, the setting is, without going into the mathematical complications, there is a village. In the village, there are three people, three agents. One is a landlord, another is a merchant, and the third is a worker or a laborer. Just three people in this village, and it is a self-contained economy. No one can buy services or provide services outside of this economy. Now, three people, uh, the landlord is the wealthiest. All of them actually have some initial cash, some initial endowment, but the landlord is the wealthiest and the most influential. The merchant is the second, and the merchant typically gives goods to the landlord, also gives basic goods of necessity to the worker or to the laborer. And the laborer works on the lands of the landlord. The laborer does not work for the merchant. They have nothing really to offer to the merchant, except for the merchant has been having something to offer to the laborer, which is goods for basic survival, basic necessities, groceries, etc. Uh, so now, one way for the landlord would be to directly threaten and coerce this particular worker. The other way would be that the landlord tells the worker that I am going to pay you just the amount of wages that are enough for you to survive, and if if you don't comply by this particular offer, then you know I will do nothing. I will basically not give you anything at all. Okay. uh, Now you can see that here, if it was just a relationship between the landlord and the laborer could certainly say that, hey, I cannot work below a particular threshold. So here is what I'm going to do. You don't give me wages, I'm not going to work. Uh, there's going to be no real, work happening on your field, and that's going to be fine. I have some initial endowment, some cash. I'm just going to live off of that at least for a while, and your enterprise is not going to work. However, Notice here that the landlord can also exercise indirect power. That indirect power the landlord exercises by, let's say, making it known that the landlord has also had discussion with the merchant that I will not buy your goods if uh, this particular laborer does not comply by my rules or does not take my offer, I'm not going to purchase goods from you. And basically, I am your largest customer. You will have to just survive on the little money that this laborer can give you, and your business is going to come to a much lower level. So, if this laborer rejects, here is what I'm going to do. So now what's going to happen is that this merchant is going to threaten the laborer and say that, hey, you better accept that landlord's offer. Otherwise, I am going to be in trouble as well. And if I am in trouble, I'm not going to give you even the basic necessities from the little money that you have. So essentially, you will immediately die. So, in that particular case, the laborer really faces a tough situation where, with the reserve money, the landlord can still survive, the merchant can still survive, but the laborer cannot do anything with that reserve money that he or she has in their store. They cannot even survive for a bit. So, the laborer essentially says, okay, I will comply by the landlord's offer because the laborer really has no other choice. And notice that all of the others still have a little bit of cash that they can use to survive. Now, obviously, you must be thinking a lot of different things, that how is the landlord going to survive without labor on the farm, and how is the landlord going to survive without uh, dealing with the merchant, and all of that is addressed in the paper. The bottom line over here is that the minimum utility or the initial cash endowment that all three have, uh, in this particular situation, only two of them can use that initial cash endowment. The laborer, despite having some cash endowment, cannot even survive for a single day without the landlord's goodwill. Okay, so that is one example. Another example comes from a book by Lloyd Gruber, and that book is called Ruling the World. Now, what Lloyd Gruber really says is that a similar thing happened between Mexico, the United States, and Canada when they were discussing the NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. And this particular agreement between these three countries was done in a manner where Mexico really had no choice. Mexico had to join this free trade agreement. And here is how. Uh, Imagine that without NAFTA, Mexico was having a good time. They were enjoying through their trade benefits. They were supplying to the US. They were also supplying to Canada, and they were, overall in a stable situation. That is where the game starts with no NAFTA at all. Okay. Now think of it in this manner: the US goes to Canada and says that, hey, I'm thinking it would be beneficial for me, at least, and for all of us, uh, if we had a free trade agreement. Okay, let's say the US says that it's going to be beneficial for me, it's going to be beneficial for you, Canada, if we get into this free trade agreement, and it would be even more beneficial if Mexico was part of it. And let us say that Mexico doesn't really want that, because if Mexico becomes part of this free trade agreement, Mexico will get access to the US and Canadian market, but Canada and US will also get a lot of access to the Mexican market. So, what's going to happen over here is that without NAFTA, let's say Mexico was at utility 10. Okay, and without NAFTA, let's say Canada was also at utility 10. But without NAFTA, US was at utility 5. Okay, so Mexico and Canada, they are at a stable level. US is a little bit over here without NAFTA. Now NAFTA comes in, okay? So, or let's say NAFTA doesn't come in, US and Canada, they simply agree, okay? So Canada says that, okay, uh, we both have agreed that we are doing this NAFTA. We will ask Mexico and we will see whether Mexico wants an in or doesn't want an in. So let's say they go to Mexico. Mexico could have theoretically two choices. One is that you reject this particular offer, another is that you accept this particular offer. Now, if Mexico rejects this offer, the US, the United States, and Canada, because of this free trade agreement, might just start dealing with each other and might forego some of the products that they were initially importing from Mexico. If the US wants it, they can get it from Canada. If Canada wants it, they can get it from the United States. So, in that case, by rejecting the offer, Mexico comes to the utility level of zero. On the other hand, if Mexico was accepting the offer, Mexico would come to a utility level of 2. So if if NAFTA had not happened, Mexico was at 10. If NAFTA takes place, Mexico is at 2. And if NAFTA takes place without Mexico, Mexico is at 0. So does Mexico really have a choice over here? No, because obviously 10 was a very good deal where things were fine for Mexico. There was no discussion of NAFTA. The next, now 10 is not happening. US and Canada have decided that they are going into NAFTA. Mexico now has just two options left. One is that you go to 0 and reject NAFTA, so be terribly worse off, or you accept NAFTA and instead of 0, you go to 2. So you're worse off than earlier, but at least you're better off from a very, very bad as compared to a very, very bad situation. And if you really look at it, Mexico has no choice rationally than to say yes to a NAFTA. So this is another form of triadic power where a particular group is able to dominate another person without directly coercing them. Okay. So here, Canada and United States did not really coerce Mexico. They could have been like, okay, we are doing NAFTA. You can be out of it if you want. But even without that direct coercion, they were still able to coerce Mexico at some level. A similar but not exactly the same mechanism and a much more benign one is captured in a book called Democracy, an American Novel. This is a very short book written by Henry Adams, who was the grandson of John Quincy Adams, the American president. And this was written in 1880 and actually uh, published anonymously at first, and later on, Henry Adam was identified as the author. And in this particular book, he talks about a love triangle, a love affair between John Carrington, a 30-year-old widow, and Silas Ratcliffe. And over here, Ratcliffe is the practical man, and Carrington is the more upright sort of a politician who comes from a humble background. His family is in economic need, and in order to get this person out of the picture, what the other guy does is to get him a very well paid job abroad. And because this guy Carrington is coming from an economically weaker background, he cannot say no to that offer because financially it's just too lucrative, and accepts it and goes. And in a way, if you look at it, was there any coercion directly applied by Ratcliffe over Carrington? And the answer would be no. But if you look deeply enough, then did Carrington have any other option? And if he's a rational player, you would say that did not have any other option, and coercion was applied in this particular case. So the basic idea behind this particular form of power is that coercion can be visible or coercion can be hidden, and especially in these triadic relationships, coercion could really be subtle and invisible.